My takeaway is a little bit different than Amanda's, just in terms of the energy level in both of those days that we saw this week. I mean, before all of this, I had set out to try to do a little blog piece on, some of the highs and lows over the last 20 years at these political days, because it's just fascinating. It's like, I love covering these political days, because what you do when you go out there is you sort of get a general sense of each of the political parties based on how many people are there, the enthusiasm level, the slate of candidates. And there's certainly been a ton of memorable moments out there. But what I came away with yesterday after the Republican Day was the sense that this was very much like a day in the late 1990s when Republicans were, running things. They had the governorship then, of course. There was that level of enthusiasm. They had what we saw during much of the decade in the early 2000s was that, they would bring out Jim Edgar and they would bring out Judy Topinka as sort of the symbols of the gravy days of the 1990s. And they had this lineup of candidates there, the Alan Keyeses of the world. And it was almost during that period as if to say, we can be like we once were, but yet they didn't have the firepower to do it. This time, they clearly have the firepower to do it. They have a candidate in Rauner who, as Amanda and Bernie have said, has got immense wealth and resources to throw at this, and it's just percolating through every level. I mean, we saw people, you get a sense even these no-name candidates who were kind of on kamikaze missions against Jesse White and Attorney General, that they might even be getting some resources. A guy named Mike Webster, who, I thought he was a Pittsburgh Steelers center, but he's running against the Attorney General. But you hear a guy like that, against Jesse, I'm wrong. But you get an idea from those guys. Even they're getting benefited from it. So the Republican Party is clearly on a rebound. But what I think Rauner himself even said yesterday is, look, we're ahead double digits in the polls right now. It's tough playing with the lead, and anybody who follows sports knows that. If you're playing football or basketball and you're ahead at halftime by 30 points, then there almost kind of becomes this. It's not a laziness, but it's just like you take your foot off the pedal a little bit. And I think that honestly is worrying the Republicans right now. On the Democratic side, Quinn has had this problem over the last couple of years where, he just would go out to the fair and it would just be this horrible political optic that he would face because he was always tangling with unions. A couple of years ago, I mean, he was jeered off the stage by AFSCME members, and it was, for all of us covering it, it's just like your jaw hits the ground on a day like that, and you think, well, why on earth would anybody put their candidate in front of this? And what we saw this year was a much more, I think, disciplined approach. I think, in the Democratic Party as a whole, there is a bit of panic. I think it's interesting to, one of the things I thought was really interesting at the Governor's Day was that you have Mike Kerrigan, the president of the AFL-CIO, being the MC, and you get a sense that labor grudgingly is coming home to Pat Quinn, and to what extent that's going to happen, we'll see. But that to me is really a key. How enthusiastic is labor going to be behind Pat Quinn? And I think in Rauner they see a guy who talks about right to work. He loves Scott Walker. He loves Mitch Daniels. That puts genuine fear into labor, even though labor is, in this lawsuit with the Quinn administration right now, which is the oddest of things. You've got that happening against the backdrop of the election. So I thought, that was a takeaway. Both parties seem very energized to me. I also think a takeaway is that in both candidates, Quinn and Rauner, they clearly are both willing to stretch the truth. And when I say that, I mean, we hear from Bruce Rauner yesterday that Pat Quinn is under criminal investigation. Well, Pat Quinn, to the best of our knowledge, is not under criminal investigation. A program he ran, the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, in 2010, is under criminal investigation, but Quinn himself is not. And so, a little bit loose and fast with the facts there, I thought. Quinn is doing the same thing to Rauner, where with this Cayman Islands story, he's just outright calling Rauner a tax evader. Well, we don't know that, and we're not probably going to know much about his taxes, as Amanda pointed out, because he made clear at the fairgrounds yesterday, he's not going to release his attachments. We're not going to see, where his investments are at. We're not going to see what kind of tax shelters and tax deductions he takes. They're just not going to give that up. So I think what we have in our hands now is an election that is going to get much tighter, and these double-digit polls are they're not going to stand. I think we're going to see a race that gets decided in suburban Cook County, and it's also going to be decided in Chicago by the turnout we get for Quinn. I don't think Rauner has much of an issue in the collar counties or downstate. I think that's solidly in his corner. The battleground is suburban Cook and Chicago. I think it's interesting with Rauner, though. The Democrats have been trying really hard to penetrate his business empire. And, you think about a candidate running for governor who has an interest in a company, and two of its executives, or an executive and then a trader, wind up, getting indicted by a criminal grand jury in New Jersey. You would think that would be fodder for the Democrats to exploit. But yet what we see with that, what we've seen with other instances, the nursing home story, for example, he's set up these companies under GTCR in such a way where, as he says, he's 5 layers removed from, any problems. And so, I think that's a difficult thing when you have a candidate not answering questions, when you have a candidate who has a business structure that's not subject to the FOIA, and we don't really have a way to look inside other than through like the Securities and Exchange Commission or things like that. It's very difficult to penetrate and to find things on him, and that's why I think that's why we're seeing the Democrats try to exploit the wealth component, because it's an easy thing for people to understand. It's an easy thing for them to go out and tout a $100,000 parking space. Who has one of those? But I think the real story with Rauner, and it might emerge as we, if he gets, if he succeeds. I mean, it might emerge down the line. I think we're going to see this, some of his past business issues maybe come out and be a little more enlightened. I mean, people involved in those companies who were treated the wrong way might want to come forward and talk, or people who lost money in these deals might come forward and want to talk. But man, I know having in the primary, I spent probably 6 weeks of my time looking at Bruce Rauner and nursing homes. And in the end, I wound up not even writing a story about it, even though I was close to pulling the trigger like 3 or 4 times. But that story at the core seemed very simple to tell, and that was Bruce Rauner's company owned a chain of nursing homes, and a lot of bad things happened in those nursing homes. I mean, that's easy for people to understand. It's easy as a reporter to tell that story. But when you look at it, well, all right, he didn't own the company at the time these women died. There is litigation going on in 3 different venues by these victims' families about did Rauner and his company have anything to do with this? And each time, there's a ruling that is, that suggests Rauner had a hand in it. Then what I found was, we'd get another ruling in another venue that just completely undercut it. And so it's like quicksand in a way where, and the Democrats are facing that. That nursing home story, I had one union member tell me back in the primary, they regarded that as their silver bullet with Rauner, and it hasn't been the silver bullet. And that just demonstrates that getting stuff to stick against Bruce Rauner is exceptionally difficult for the Democrats. So that's why I think we see this class warfare thing playing out. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what it means either, and I'm not really bothered by the idea that the candidate is putting a lot of money into a campaign. If I were him, I would do the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. Where it's problematic, though, is if we see where all these people get into trouble is like, the classic example is Blagojevich, where he had a fundraising juggernaut early in his administration, and what we would see is just these people trading access to get state contracts and things like that. And if we see that play out, as we well could with Rauner, maybe, I don't know, we could see it with Quinn too, I guess. But that's where the buying the election part is problematic. But if you're just going out and buying campaign signs, if you're going out and doing polling, you're going out and buying commercials, that's honestly what they kind of ought to be doing to get their message out. Because you know what? You think about the average person out there, they're more tuned in to ESPN or the Hallmark Channel or whatever, and it's like penetrating
Does
that.
Anybody watch commercials anymore?
Well, you got
to fast forward through them on your DVR.
Listen, I got to tell you something. I have probably some of you subscribe to Hulu. Do you know what that is? On Apple TV. I had a program on the other night, and it was an old television program. But in between the commercials, up pops a Rauner commercial, and I'm thinking, you've seriously penetrated this deep into the process where you're doing Hulu
everywhere sponsored.
I don't know. I just think it's a winning formula for a candidate like Rauner to be silent or certainly moderate on social issues, because it clobbers the Republicans every election that these social issues come up. You know, you look back to Edgar, you look back to George Bryant, you look back to Thompson. These guys are all cut out of the same fabric, where they're you know, fiscal conservatives, social moderates, and those are the Republicans who can win in Illinois, even though we are a blue state. And I think that I just think, though, from a standpoint as a voter, I hate the fact you know, forget the fact that they won't answer our questions. That's who cares? But it's like, you know, as an electorate, you know, we're all kind of like, you know, you wouldn't buy a car that way if somebody said, well, you know, I'm not going to tell you if the air conditioning works. You know, and that's kind of what we have right now.
Or if there's gas in the tank.
Or whatever, yeah, you know, and at least you have to credit Quinn, because he has been clear on what his positions are with the tax increase, for example, and he does have a record, and you know, you may agree with it or you may disagree with it, but I do find it refreshing. And Quinn, it's pretty clear, you know, we know what his positions are on things. With Rauner, we don't. Yeah.